At my daughter-in-law's wedding, she stood in my lake house, thanked everyone but me, and called it our family estate. I didn't correct her in front of 80 guests. I let her enjoy the applause, then changed the locks, listed the house for rent, and made sure her next party stopped at the gate. I sat at table number 4, right by the massive bay windows looking out over Lake Winnipesaukee. It was my house, my blood, sweat, and tears went into maintaining that property. Where 80 guests were currently sipping expensive champagne, my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, stood on the pavilion, microphone gripped firmly in her hand, beaming at the crowd. She thanked the caterer, the florist, and her own parents who had allegedly made this dream lakeside wedding possible. My name wasn't uttered once, even though every single chair, every string of fairy lights, and the entire logistical nightmare of the day had fallen squarely on my shoulders. My son, Ethan, stared down at his shoes, deliberately avoiding my eyes, while Vanessa sold the idyllic beauty of the estate as if it were her own personal masterpiece. In that moment, I didn't explode. I didn't cry. I just felt a deep, crystal clear wave of disillusionment. For months, Vanessa had hijacked the planning, casually labeling my lake house as our family estate on the invitations. I had stayed quiet just to keep the peace, even spending days scrubbing the guest rooms by myself before the weekend started. Now, here I sat, like a third-class paying guest on my own property. The reality hit me hard to this young woman. I wasn't family. I was just a free landlord, and Ethan had long since surrendered to that dynamic. I took a sip of my water and watched the happy couple take their first dance out on my deck. Vanessa had even gone so far as to dig up and pot the old rose bushes my late husband had planted, solely because the color didn't match her napkin scheme. That was the exact moment I decided this wedding was the last unearned gift they would ever receive from me. As the music swelled and the crowd applauded, I reached into my purse and felt the heavy brass keychain to the house. My plan wasn't born out of blind rage, but out of cold, logical necessity for the future. By the next morning, the fairy tale was officially over, at least for me. The guests had checked out, but the house looked like a bomb went off, covered in empty bottles, sticky floors, and mountains of trash. Ethan and Vanessa were still dead to the world in the upstairs guest suite when I hit the kitchen at 6 a.m. to brew coffee. I started sifting through the invoices left on the counter. Vanessa had seamlessly routed the security deposits for the rental furniture and the emergency electrician right through my property maintenance account, acting like it was just a given. When Vanessa finally drifted downstairs around 10 in a silk robe, she didn't lay out a single finger to help with the mess. Instead, she asked where the fresh towels were and wondered aloud if I could freeze the leftover brisket for a barbecue she wanted to host later that evening. I looked at her calmly, set my mug down, and simply told her I had an important appointment in town. The flicker of surprise in her eyes proved just how comfortable she'd become. Ethan shuffled in, half asleep, and muttered a belated thanks for the beautiful weekend. But it was too little, too late. I grabbed my purse, tucked the property deeds into a folder, and walked out the door without waiting for Vanessa's pushback. My first stop wasn't a lawyer's office. It was the local bank, followed immediately by my trusted locksmith. The financial blank check I had given Ethan since his father passed away was officially canceled. I revoked the auto draft permissions for the joint account we used for the lake house upkeep. It was time to rebuild the boundaries I had let them erode for years. Sitting in my car, I sent a brief text to my son. 2 days after the wedding, the lake house was quiet again, and the newlyweds had headed back to their apartment in Boston. I didn't waste any time. I met Leo, the local locksmith, right at the front gate. Within 2 hours, every single deadbolt on the main house, the tool shed, and the boathouse had been replaced. The spare keys Vanessa had secretly duplicated for her friends were instantly useless. Hearing the solid, metallic click of those new locks was incredibly therapeutic. At the same time, I canceled the contract with the landscaping crew I paid for every month just so Vanessa could have a country club lawn on the weekends. If they wanted to use the place, they could mow it themselves or foot the bill. I also cleared out every trace of their personal belongings from the living spaces, packing them neatly into 2 plastic storage bins by the front door. My home was no longer a free storage unit or an all-inclusive resort for people who couldn't even remember my name. By Thursday evening, Ethan showed up unannounced to grab a few forgotten wedding gifts. Watching through the kitchen window, I saw him jiggle his old key in the lock, utterly confused. He pumped the handle a few times, stared blankly at the key, and finally knocked tentatively on the glass. When I opened the door, he looked completely bewildered, while Vanessa sat in the driveway behind him, impatiently tapping her fingers on the steering wheel. I had already rehearsed exactly what I was going to say. "My key doesn't work," Ethan said, looking at me blankly. I stepped aside, letting him into the foyer, and pointed to the 2 packed bins. "I changed the locks," I replied evenly, handing him the boxes. Vanessa, notice the holdup, marched inside with a flushed face. She immediately demanded to know what this dramatic stunt was about, and asked if I had completely lost my mind. I didn't raise my voice, and I refused to take the bait about the wedding. I just matter-of-factly explained that using the house now came with new terms, since they were happy to present the estate to the world as their own. I assumed they were ready to take on the financial responsibility that came with it. I handed Ethan a typed, itemized breakdown of the monthly utilities and the upcoming $12,000 roof replacement. If they wanted access for the summer, I expected half of the fixed overhead paid up front. Vanessa let out a bitter laugh, calling it extortion and arguing that the house was meant for the family. I told her flatly that family goes both ways, and respect isn't a one-way street. Ethan stood there completely frozen, visibly torn between his fierce loyalty to his new wife and the crushing realization that I was entirely in the right. They grabbed the bins and the bill, leaving without another word. On her way out, Vanessa slammed the car door so hard it rattled the windows. I turned the deadbolt, heard that crisp new click, and felt an overwhelming sense of peace. For the next 3 weeks, I got the absolute cold shoulder from my son. It was a classic Vanessa tactic she'd used before to get her way. Freeze mom out until she cracks and apologizes. Except this time, the silent treatment backfired completely. I thoroughly enjoyed the peace and quiet up on the lake. I repainted the kitchen, caught up on the stack of books gathering dust on my nightstand, and took long, uninterrupted morning walks along the shoreline. My life suddenly felt light and entirely mine again. The expense report I gave Ethan went completely ignored, and no money hit my account. That was all the green light I need to plot my next move, especially with peak summer right around the corner. In the past, Ethan and Vanessa would monopolize the property almost every weekend with their friends, leaving me to hide out in the small attic loft, cooking and cleaning for a house full of guests. Those days were over, and I knew exactly when they would try to cash in on the house again. By mid-July, I spotted a post on Vanessa's Instagram. She was planning a massive summer bash for her corporate marketing team. The location tags were intentionally vague, but the caption boasted about an exclusive private lakeside retreat. She was clearly banking on the assumption that I would have broken down by now, leaving the house open for her as usual. She had sent out invitations to 80 people without so much as sending me a text. I smiled to myself and picked up the phone to call an old friend. Thank you for spending your time with Quiet Revenge. Every story we share is carefully selected, researched, edited, reviewed, and produced by our team because we believe stories of family, resilience, and quiet justice deserve thoughtful care. We also want to be transparent. AI tools may assist with certain parts of our creative workflow, but every story is guided, checked, and shaped by real people before it reaches you. Because our channel's monetization is currently unavailable. Your support helps us continue creating these stories for this wonderful community. If these videos have ever comforted, inspired, or encouraged you, please consider supporting Quiet Revenge with the price of a small cup of coffee. Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/quiet-revenge-family. Ko-fi, https://ko-fi.com/thestreefamily. PayPal, https://www.paypal.com/paypalm/kanhwangmin. Thank you for being part of our journey. My friend Clara ran a high-end boutique vacation rental agency in the area. We met up for coffee, and I laid out the plan I wanted to put the lake house on the market for the next 2 months, targeting affluent retirees looking for quiet monthly rentals. Summer demand in New England was through the roof, and Clara was ecstatic about the pristine condition of the property. Within days, professional photos were shot, the listing went live, and the bookings came pouring in using the first rental deposit. I booked myself a 3-week trip to the Canadian Rockies, a bucket list vacation I had put off for years because I was always playing caretaker to the kids. The house was fully booked for the season, perfectly overlapping with the exact weeks Vanessa had scheduled her corporate party. I set everything up through a premium property management service that handled turnovers and cleaning, ensuring I wouldn't lift a finger. The management of my property was now strictly business, leaving zero room for emotional manipulation. Ethan finally rang my phone on a Tuesday evening, sounding incredibly stressed out and anxious. After some transparent small talk, he tried to casually pivot to the upcoming weekend. He mentioned Vanessa needed to get into the house early to set up for an event and asked if they could swing by to pick up the new keys. I replied in the most relaxed, cheerful tone I could muster, telling him that was going to be impossible because the house was occupied. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "What do you mean?" "Occupied," Ethan asked, his voice cracking. I explained calmly that I had leased the house out to vacationers to cover the cost of the new roof. Since I hadn't heard back from him regarding the expenses, I had to find a practical way to balance the books myself. Ethan started stammering about Vanessa's party and how 80 of her colleagues had already RSVP'd and were expecting a lakeside event. I told him I was genuinely sorry for the mix-up, but the house was now a legally binding commercial rental for the summer, and contracts are contracts. Right then, I heard Vanessa screaming in the background. She snatched the phone right out of his hand, shrieking that I was being incredibly selfish and accusing me of trying to ruin her life and humiliate her in front of her bosses. I listened to her tirade in total silence, waiting patiently for her to run out of breath. When she finally stopped to breathe, I said, "Vanessa, at the wedding, you completely forgot to mention who actually owns this house. Now you're acting like you have a legal right to it. You don't." I wished them a good night and hung up before she could start up again. There were no tears, no shaking hands, just the immense relief of holding my ground. They thought they could ice me out. But now they had to pay the price for their own arrogance. On the Saturday of the infamous corporate party, I boarded my flight to Calgary as planned. My house was occupied by a lovely, incredibly polite, older couple from Connecticut who were looking for absolute peace and quiet. I had asked Clara to keep an eye on the place just in case, which turned out to be a stroke of genius. As I found out later, Vanessa actually showed up at the front gate with 2 SUVs packed to the brim with catering bins and decorations, convinced my rental story was just a bluff. Instead of finding a guilt-ridden, lonely mother ready to cave, she was met at the gate by a professional property manager and 2 wealthy renters enjoying afternoon tea on the deck. Vanessa tried to make a scene, loudly demanding access and claiming it was a family misunderstanding. Clara didn't bat an eye. She pulled out the official lease agreement and politely but firmly informed Vanessa that if she didn't leave the property immediately, she would call the local sheriff for trespassing. The renters looked thoroughly appalled by the screaming match at the gate. Ethan, completely mortified by the spectacle, finally grabbed his wife by the arm and forced her back into the car just as her co-workers started arriving in town. Vanessa had to frantically reroute her entire company party to an expensive country club nearby, paying thousands out of her own pocket to save face. Her carefully curated image of the perfect hostess with a private family estate vanished in an instant. I watched the whole story unfold via text message from Clara while sitting in a mountain lodge, enjoying a smooth glass of Pinot Noir. By the time I returned at the end of August, the house was immaculate, and my bank account was looking better than ever. The summer renters had treated the property with total respect, and the roof replacement was fully funded. I didn't hear a peep from Ethan or Vanessa for weeks, until my son finally showed up at my door alone on a Sunday afternoon. He looked exhausted, all the defensive edge completely gone from his face. We sat out on the deck, and he offered a genuine, heartfelt apology for how he and Vanessa had treated me. He admitted they had taken me for granted and that Vanessa's behavior at the wedding was completely disrespectful. I accepted his apology, but I made it clear that we weren't going back to the way things used to be. The lake house was going to remain on the rental market for half the year, moving forward to secure my own retirement fund. Vanessa had clearly realized her mind games had zero power over me. She hadn't even bothered to come along. I poured Ethan a cup of coffee, and we just talked about his job, free from the heavy cloud of entitlement that usually hung over our conversations. I could tell it felt good for him to just be a son again, without being caught in the crossfire of his wife's social climbing. But the old privileges of treating my life like their personal playground were permanently gone, traded away for his months of silence. Autumn rolled around, and the lake perfectly mirrored the crisp, bright October sky. My house belonged to me again, entirely stripped of the demands of people who only saw me as a backdrop for their lifestyle. I learned that you don't need to throw a tantrum to command respect quiet. Immovable boundaries do the job just fine. My relationship with Ethan settled into a new space, a bit more distant, but infinitely more honest. Vanessa stayed in the background, and whenever we crossed paths at holiday family dinners, she was perfectly polite and kept her distance. She knew exactly what lay beneath my quiet demeanor, now an unshakable resolve she couldn't break. I didn't regret a single choice, a single new lock, or a single no I had handed out. The rental income even gave me enough cushion to plan a winter trip down south after I winterized the house, standing out on the dock, watching the ripples on the water, I felt a profound sense of contentment. My life was my own project again, completely independent of the expectations of a selfish daughter-in-law or a passive son. Sometimes, you have to lock the doors tight just to make people realize the true value of what they were taking for granted. I turned around, walked slowly back toward the house, and looked forward to the quiet evening I had built for myself. Thank you for spending your time with Quiet Revenge. Every story we share is carefully selected, researched, edited, reviewed, and produced by our team because we believe stories of family, resilience, and quiet justice deserve thoughtful care. We also want to be transparent. AI tools may assist with certain parts of our creative workflow, but every story is guided, checked, and shaped by real people before it reaches you. Because our channel's monetization is currently unavailable, your support helps us continue creating these stories for this wonderful community. If these videos have ever comforted, inspired, or encouraged you, please consider supporting Quiet Revenge with the price of a small cup of coffee. Patreon https://www.patreon.com/Quiet Revenge Family. Ko-fi https://Kodash fi.com/Thestry Family. PayPal https://www.paypal.com/Paypalma/Kanhuangmin. Thank you for being part of our journey.